General and instructor at Harvard Medical School, and this is Healthy Living, Let's Get Real. I'm here today with a very special guest. This is physician and author Peter Grinspoon, who has been at Massachusetts General Hospital now for 11 years, same as me, but a practicing physician for almost 25 years. And he's here to talk about his work, his lifestyle, and his book. Hi, Peter. How are you?
Hi. Good, Monique. Thanks.
Thank you so much for coming on the show.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah. So tell us a little more about what you do as a doctor.
Well, I'm a primary care doctor in an inner city clinic, and I just do adult primary care medicine that, you know, a lot of adult primary care doctors do. Mm-hmm. But it's for a challenging population because only 40% of my patients speak English, and we deal with a lot of challenging cultural issues. A lot of people, you know, it's hard enough for your average American to deal with our complex and broken healthcare system. But imagine if you don't speak English or don't have a high school or junior high education or don't have a lot of medical literacy trying to negotiate our broken healthcare system. So it's primary care with a lot of extra challenges. So it keeps us on our toes. That said, I think we do a really good job at MGH taking care of this very complicated patient population.
Wow. And what kinds of things do you advise your patients then on healthy lifestyle?
Well, it's harder to be healthy to a certain extent is easier when you're rich. Yes. You know, you join a gym, you buy organic food, and that's not an option for a lot of our patients.
Yeah.
I mean, unfortunately, a lot of them have to decide between food or medicine, you know, make very difficult choices. But really, we go back to the basics. Get enough sleep, try to eat vegetables and fruits, try not to eat processed foods. You know, a lot of people can't afford daycare, and they work the night shift, which is really bad for you actually, and are running around. And if you could just carve out enough time for yourself that you're getting the basics, some fruits, some vegetables, enough sleep, and, you know, keeping anxiety under control. I think people are really stressed out. You know, people are working harder to make ends meet. You know, some of our patients are worried about ICE raids and getting deported, which is really unfortunate. And, you know, they're working 2 or 3 jobs. I think stress is one of the biggest things.
Yes.
You know, we've discussed this. Stress is one of the most toxic things to your health and well-being that you could possibly deal with in your life. And some of it you don't have control over, but we try to help them, educate them as to what they do have control over and try to help them as much as we can.
So do you think that you are able to help people to live a healthier lifestyle with healthier nutrition and physical activity, stress reduction through your work?
Well, I think to a certain extent. Everybody is talking about, the new buzzword is social determinants of health. You know, people need childcare and food security and housing security. And on the one hand, I agree that's really important. And on the other hand, it's really frustrating as an inner city primary care physician because I can't just prescribe housing to a patient of mine that's homeless. Yeah. So we help as much as we can. And I think we do a good job recognizing that and connecting people to the resources that are there and maximizing, you know, what they can do. You know, sometimes people don't understand, for example, that if they have heart failure, they don't know how much salt is in prepared foods. They're like, oh, I was just eating canned soup. And they don't realize that canned soup's enough salt in it to feed, you know, to support a small village for like 6 months. I mean, there's so much salt in prepared foods. Yeah. So I think education goes a long way, and we do as much as we can. But at the same time, it is a little bit learned helplessness because there's so much we can't do. But again, we do what we can. I think part of why physicians are suffering, part of one of the many reasons why physicians are suffering this horrible epidemic of burnout is because of learned helplessness. There's only so much we can do, and there's so much more that needs to be done. And it is very difficult to watch these situations that we don't have that much control over, and we're really the only ones working on it a lot of the time.
Yeah, that's really good work that you're doing.
Thanks. So are you, though.
What kinds of things do you do to take care of yourself? Because it's stressful just working in this environment, right? So how do you take care of yourself?
Well, the first thing I do is I don't do this morning till night. When I first came out of residency, I would work 5 days a week from like 7 in the morning till 7 at night seeing patients.
Wow.
And I was a wreck. In fact, I was so unhealthy, and this is a whole other discussion, but I developed a very impressive addiction to prescription opiates, which we can talk about. And I was unhealthy. I wasn't sleeping. I wasn't exercising. I was a case study in how to be an unhealthy physician, which unfortunately is probably more physicians abide by that. You know, nothing could hurt me. I'm a physician. Physician, heal thyself. Physicians are awful patients. And I've come a full 180 degrees about that. I still don't get much sleep because just natural enthusiasm, and there's a lot of stuff I like to do, read, write, stuff like that. But I really incorporate not being a workaholic. I think it's so important to find things outside of medicine to pursue, to keep you, just really engaged in life, and to try to give you perspective on these life or death situations that you're dealing with every day. Because being a doctor isn't like being an accountant or a banker or a professor. If you make a mistake in another job, someone yells at you. But if we make a mistake, someone's going to die. It's really a lot of stress. And I think the pressure really adds up. So I do medicine part-time, not full-time, which I think almost everybody that I know has decided to do, at least in primary care, because I think it's deadly and toxic if you do it all the time.
Yeah.
And I think it's really important to leave your work in the office and not bring it at home and not dwell upon it when you go home. And I think some of the antidotes to the stress are exercise. It's hard to be stressed out when you've had a really good workout. And I like to pursue my hobbies, reading and writing for me. I know other people have all kinds of different hobbies. It was interesting. There's this social media chat on Twitter about that doctors, SoMeDocs, about what doctors talking about different issues on social media. And one of the questions last night was, do you think extracurriculars are a distraction from your medical practice? And my answer was, I think my medical practice is a distraction from my extracurriculars. I mean, you've got to keep this in perspective. Like, we're a human being first and a doctor second. But I learned that the hard way. Yeah. So I would say exercise, pursuing your hobbies, trying to get enough sleep, and healthy eating is really important. Nutrition is killer.
And this guy.
Oh, and finally, I'll just pick him up.
Let's bring up Benji.
Benji. I think if you could afford it, I would recommend a cute, fluffy pet for anybody. Because I can honestly say that our dog Benji is the most popular member of our family. And, especially we have teenagers at home. Teenagers are no longer, reliably friendly when you interact with them. Whereas Benji is always happy to see you, is always affectionate. People who have dogs, actually, it's been studied, live longer. And they don't know if it's because of the affection or, they're always affectionate. The companionship. A lot of people have written how there's a crisis of loneliness in our society. People are disconnected, especially elderly people. Or if it's just all the exercise. Each time he gets me off the couch, off Twitter to go for a walk, I'm walking, exactly.
You're getting your steps in.
Even, especially in the days when, it's 20 degrees out and I would never go for a walk, I'm walking around the neighborhood and I'm meeting my neighbors, I'm talking to my neighbors. So instead of sitting, being sedentary and being solitary, I'm connecting with people, connecting with my neighbors, exercising, and interacting with this warm, affectionate, fluffy creature. So I think having an animal, especially a dog, but they're cat people too. I don't want to ignite that ferocious debate, dogs versus cats. But I think that's a really great way to keep healthy and relaxed as well.
Yeah, I'm a cat person personally, but I do know that just interacting with the animals does help decrease stress levels. You can feel your blood pressure come down. Like when you get home from work and you pick up your fuzzy little cat or dog, whatever, and you can feel your blood pressure levels come down. I think it's fantastic. I'm really struck by something. So I have got a copy of your book here that I'm just going to hold up. And in this book, when I first picked it up and started reading it, it was within the first few pages that I was like, oh, this book speaks to me. So free refills. You begin the book with the day that police officer and FBI agent came to your office with charges. They were bringing charges against
that was
you.
really fun.
Yeah, well, very stressful. But you said something, and this is totally what struck me, which has nothing to do with the main point of what was going on. It was that you took the rest of that day off, and it was one of the only 2 days that you called out sick. Because you didn't call out sick, because doctors don't call out sick. It's like illegal or something, It's
a really pathological part of our culture.
And it's part of what led to the whole problem, And you were writing fake prescriptions to get, was it Vicodin?
Yeah, mostly Vicodin.
Yeah, and it really caught up to you. But the lifestyle that you were living at that time is a lifestyle that's really common to a lot of physicians. You were working, as you said, 5 days a week, all day long. You weren't doing anything for self-care.
Right, no lunch, no breaks for food.
I mean, you feel guilty if you go pee, right?
Right, barely went to the bathroom.
Yeah, totally.
Absolutely.
Because people are waiting. It's you got to see so many patients. There's a lot of pressure. But the lack of self-care led to a real imbalance, and you were self-medicating basically. So it really struck me. It was a poignant moment when you pointed out that it was like one of only 2 sick days that you took was the rest of the day after the police came for you.
Right, and I didn't really enjoy that day very much.
No, it wasn't really like a downtime day or anything like that. But it really struck me because I think a lot of doctors get into trouble because of that mentality. Like, I have to work, I have to work, I have to work. No time to take care of myself. And a lot of healthcare providers just generally, a lot of caregivers feel very guilty about taking any time for self-care. And you have to tell them or explain to them, in my role now, I'm able to explain to them, you are only going to be able to take care of other people when you're taking care of yourself. It's
Absolutely.
so important. Like, it makes me a better doctor. And I think you have come full circle.
Absolutely.
So
that's why they use the metaphor of putting the oxygen mask on yourself before you put it on other people, because if you're like unconscious, you're not going to be that helpful for other people around you.
Yeah.
And a lot of people get very trapped by their lives. They find themselves and then they're in debt from medical school or law school or whatever. Then they've got little kids and they owe money on a big house that they didn't even want that much, but they just bought it because everybody else is buying big houses, and they're trapped. And then, the thing about, we call the book Free Refills because doctors have such access to medications. They have free refills, and they have a higher rate, consequently, between the stress and the access to medications. But any professional or anybody that's stressed out can find themselves trapped in a life. And the problem is, once you're trapped, it's very hard to get help. In our case, as physicians, the minute you try to get help, you get in trouble. The medical board might take away your license.
As happened to you.
Right. So who on earth would ask for help? So nobody asks for help because you get punished instead of treated. So part of what I want to change is, what you're working on, which is the culture of people taking care of themselves to begin with, so things don't become off track in the first place. But then second of all, when things start to get off track, people should be allowed, in a non-punitive, non-judgmental way, people should be allowed to get help. Because which is safer, someone who's getting help for a problem or someone that's hiding a problem and getting worse that nobody knows about?
Which was your case for a long time.
10 years.
So what changed? How were you able to get the help you need? I mean, you lost your license for a period of time and really floundered.
Yeah, what changed is a smart pharmacist realized that I wasn't a 19-year-old nanny from New Zealand named Jana, and she called the state police. And at the time, I was very angry with her. In retrospect, I'm like, I couldn't be more grateful. She probably saved my life, and that's
so you were writing false prescriptions in the name of this nanny.
Yes,
and the pharmacist caught you, basically.
Yes, and I should have gotten
reported you.
Yes, I should have gotten a starring role on the show America's Dumbest Criminals, but instead I ended up with the state police and the DEA in my office. When you're addicted to opiates or to anything really, it takes over your brain slowly but surely. And at first you're doing it to get high, it's kind of fun. But then toward the end, you're just doing it not to feel sick, and it becomes a compulsion. And you start to weigh short-term much more heavily than you weigh long-term. And these schemes and plots make perfect sense to your addicted mind. But then you look at it 10 years later, and you're like, what was I thinking? It was the craziest, most harebrained plot. And people think that a couple misconceptions, that addiction's fun. It's like the most miserable state in the world. And it's not a character flaw or a hedonistic thing that people do. It's absolutely miserable. And people also think that most of the crazy things that people do are when they're intoxicated on drugs. But I think that when you're drug seeking is when you're doing the crazy things, because you're just so desperate, you'll do anything to obtain drugs. And that's when I hatched this crazy plot that got me in so much trouble, which got me the help that I needed, which probably saved my life and my career.
It was a blessing in disguise.
It was. But it's sort of learning the hard way.
You did like a bunch of different rehab programs.
Well, I did one, but it was a 90-day rehab that the medical board and the physician health service sent me to. They sent me as a Jewish atheist to a Christian rehab in the South, which couldn't have been more of a mismatch. So they thought that by repeating platitudes from AA for 90 days would somehow get me better. But what really got me better was the long-term follow-up of the physician health service program. They followed me for like 5 years.
Okay, yeah. And that was, I sort of think of that as like a rehab program in a way.
Yeah, exactly. The long-term follow-up. It's a disease. You can't just send someone to detox for 3 days. You've got to follow them up.
Yeah. What are this is a little bit of off the topic, but I'm just curious, what do you think about Suboxone?
Well, I think Suboxone's basically a wonder drug and should be offered to everybody who's addicted to opiates. And it's a tragedy, two things. One, that it's only offered to about a fifth of people who are addicted to opiates because we have a broken infrastructure, A. And B, we have a lot of flaky rehab places that don't offer it. They just offer the 12 steps, which were created in 1937, about 100 years ago, 80 years ago, before we even had, MRIs, modern neurobiology, and medication. So I think that it's a tragedy that more people aren't offered Suboxone. And two, there's a real stigma against doctors because most doctors aren't allowed to practice on Suboxone because the medical board thinks they're quote unquote impaired. They're not impaired. It's like a diabetic being on insulin, but it's a real stigma against doctors. So I think that doctors' lives are, and pilots and nurses too, are needlessly being put at risk by them not being allowed to be on Suboxone. So I had to do it without being on Suboxone, and I was able to do it, but it really does. Suboxone is proven to lower the risk of overdose and death. It's the only medication that's been proven to do so. So why wouldn't you offer it to doctors who have free refills to medications and have a higher risk of addiction and have such high stress? Why would you put their lives at risk as opposed to other people? It doesn't make any sense. It's really not fair.
Yeah, so medication-assisted therapy is the one therapy for opioid use disorder that is shown to help prevent relapse and overdose deaths. That's like the major thing. Is it part of your program right now?
No, I was never allowed to because this is not offered to doctors.
You're literally not allowed to, so doctors are not allowed to.
Well, doctors are allowed to be on it, but the medical board won't let them go back to work. So de facto, they're not allowed to. And now the physician health services say we decide on a case-by-case basis. And they're only saying that because there have been lawsuits and they don't want to get sued. But in reality, I haven't heard of a single case. And I worked for the Physician Health Service. It was actually pretty cool. They invited me to be one of the associate directors of the Physician Health Service, like 5 years after I got into recovery. So I sat at the same table that I sat in right after the state police and the DA raided my office, but on the other side of the table helping other people who were just getting in trouble with drugs and alcohol, using my experience to help them get into recovery. So I know a lot about physicians in recovery from both sides of the issue, but I haven't heard of a single physician that's been allowed to return to medical practice on Suboxone. So I think that's a real injustice.
So you've been able to do this now. You're clean and sober for how many years?
11.
11 years now. And so your lifestyle, your healthy lifestyle is like it.
Absolutely.
Yeah, it's so
important. And another big thing I have to say is, one thing that really helped me is that nobody gave up on me.
Yeah.
None of my friends, family members, relatives gave up on me. And I think that's really critical. I was still there underneath. Even though I was addicted and doing all these crazy and illegal things, nobody gave up on me. And I think that it's one of the hardest things is when you have a loved one who's addicted. Yeah. They might be stealing or breaking the law or doing all kinds of like destructive things, but they're still there underneath. Yeah. And I think if you give up on them, they're sunk. And if you try not to give up on them, they have a much higher chance of recovering. And I think the fact that nobody gave up on me was really the key to the fact that I made it.
Those negative behaviors are actually part of the addiction. It's part of the illness. Right. On the other hand, it's really important that people also understand how not to enable the illness.
And to protect themselves. If someone's like draining your bank account that you need for retirement, you've got to change, the key to the bank account.
Oh, and giving somebody money might be feeding their addiction, their problem, not really helping them.
Right, exactly.
So it's very important for people to understand how the negative behaviors are part of the illness, but also how not to enable the illness.
Right, that is such a complicated issue that I don't think anybody has the answer to worked out completely yet, because it's very complicated. Because you don't want to cut them off. They used to think that, let them find their bottom. But these days with fentanyl, which is deadly, the synthetic opiates, their bottom, as they say, and you're not supposed to use the word addict, but the saying is, and I'm allowed to say because I am an addict, dead addicts don't recover. But at the same time, you don't want to feed a habit and let them be so comfortable that they don't get any help. So that's something that nobody has the answer to yet.
It's a very tough balance to be emotionally supportive, and yet not giving somebody the resources where they could continue to
right. I mean, it's about healthy boundaries is what it comes down to. But where to draw the line is really difficult.
Yeah. So we talked a little bit about your healthy lifestyle and your self-care regimen and how it involves a number of things, including Benji the dog here.
Benji the dog, yeah. Who wouldn't be healthy with Benji the dog in their lap?
So physical activity. So you get up and you walk. You're not going to be sitting and vegging in front of the television.
Well, I find weightlifting to be the thing that clears my mind the most.
That's awesome.
Yeah,
what do you do?
3 times a week. Just regular weightlifting at the gym. I go to the Y. There's some old people, there's me, and there's some young people that lift like 40 times as much as I do. And there's more data that weightlifting is really good for anxiety and depression and really good for your muscle mass as you get older. And you don't even have to do that much, just a couple of times a week for like 15 minutes. Yeah.
I love this topic because everybody thinks of exercise and they think cardio.
Right.
Which is great. Cardio has its role. Yeah, it's cardiovascular fitness and pumping blood and all that. But we're seeing more and more evidence that resistance training actually helps with all kinds of other, like the metabolic outcomes that we want, like decreasing the blood sugars and the risk of diabetes. But now we're also seeing, you're exactly right, with some mental health outcomes. That's fantastic.
I find that weightlifting is almost like taking a drug in terms of my mood. Like I'm like euphoric after like 20 minutes in the gym lifting weights.
Wow.
And it's like the same endorphins, and I can't recommend it enough. So I would say exercise in general. Going for a walk with my wife. I love swimming, but if there's one thing in particular that helps my mood, I would say it's weightlifting.
Wow.
Crank some music and just start pumping the iron, and you just feel great. Nothing feels better.
Do you work with a trainer?
I should, but I don't. I have, so I know what I'm doing.
Okay, so,
Yeah.
you were interested in it, you got a trainer, you learned how to use the different
Right. There are
machines.
two ways to use a trainer. One is if you hate going and you need the motivation.
Yeah.
I love going. Of course, I'd be so overzealous that I'd end up injuring myself, and that wasn't so helpful. So I went with a trainer enough to learn what I'm doing. And I think the best use of a trainer, because it's expensive, is to go to learn the right technique so that you're not overdoing it or doing it the wrong way.
Yeah, good. How long have you been doing the weightlifting?
Ever since I got out of rehab.
Really?
Literally since the day I got out of rehab. I switched opiates for weights.
That is fantastic.
So same part of my brain, I'm convinced.
Yeah, so when I encounter a patient who's not exercising in any way, shape, or form, and they say, there's just nothing that I like to do, I try to counsel them, like, I think you just need to try a lot of different things. Just keep trying. Like, maybe square dancing's not for you, or maybe
Right.
Zumba's not for you, but maybe rock climbing is. Like, you
I
just
encourage
don't
them
know.
to look at it very selfishly.
Yeah.
Think of it as time for yourself when you're listening to music and you're not taking care of anybody else. You're not answering the phone, and you're not worrying about anything but your own needs. And then they say, hey, yeah, I could be really selfish and just spend time with myself. And then if you help them think of it as like time for themselves, that's my. We all have our tricks as doctors to try to get the patients to listen to what we say, and every once in a while they actually do. So it's good to share techniques.
Yeah, more and more women are turning to weightlifting because the more muscle mass you have, the more calories you burn when you're just sitting there not doing anything. I mean, it increases your metabolism. It's
And
like
it's good
the
for your
only
bones.
way to do that. Very good for your bones, good for balance also for my elderly patients who aren't really sure about it. I'll usually have them start with a trainer or even with like physical therapy to increase core strength. But the more muscle tone they have, the less likely they are to fall.
Absolutely.
So key. Yeah, I could talk about this stuff forever. But what about like nutrition? What are you doing for nutrition?
Well, I wrote a blog for Harvard Health, which we both write for, about climate change and red meat. And then, therefore, I had to quit red meat. So as not to be a complete
learned.
hypocrite.
Yeah, you
well,
learned about
A,
it.
I learned, and B, I didn't want to be like in a restaurant and have someone come up to me and say, hey, aren't you that guy who wrote that you shouldn't be eating red meat, and you're eating red meat, click, click, click. So, I'm half kidding, but I actually gave up red meat, because that's just bad for your heart, and it destroys the environment. Like, there's no reason to eat red meat. It's not even that good. And I'm trying to steer away from meat towards fish, and towards chicken, but really vegetarian diet's the healthiest. So I'm really, and when I snack, my thing is I stay up late reading and writing, and everybody's asleep. And unfortunately, with teenagers in the house, there's junk food.
Yeah.
But I just try to, and I'm just a late night snacker. But now when I late night snack, I eat watermelon or carrots, or at the very worst, like pistachio nuts. I don't eat the junk food. So I've just embraced my nature that I snack. So I have healthy snacks.
Yeah.
I think if you try to go against your nature, like my twin brother is like, I just don't eat after 3. I'm like, well, good for you. You can do that. He weighs like 40 pounds less than me, which he loves to remind me every day because he's my twin brother. But he can do that. He can not eat after 3, but that doesn't work for me. I think you sort of have to understand what works for you and what doesn't work for you.
Yeah.
And I do eat snacks, but it's really easy to have healthy, yummy snacks. So the only thing I eat at night is like carrots and celery, which can be fine as long as I'm crunching on something. So I just have healthy snacks and try to stay away from the unhealthy stuff, like just no onion rings, no French fries. And for me, with an addictive personality, it's easier not to have any. Like if I have 1 onion ring, I'll have 2,000.
A lot of people are like that.
Absolutely,
Yeah.
but it's really easy for me not to have any. I just can't have the first one. But other people are different. They could just have a couple and that's fine. So you just have to know yourself.
Yeah, and we're learning more and more that it's the quality of the diet, really, that's the most important thing, so making those healthier choices. And I love that you mentioned watermelon. So I have so many patients, and just I think everybody hears this, oh, watermelon has sugar, I have to avoid watermelon. And I do so much education around this, like, okay, listen, seriously, nobody got fat or had a problem from eating watermelon.
And you can eat as much as you want.
You can't eat enough watermelon. Like, it's just, you just go crazy with that. It's the added sugars in sodas and juices, candy bars. There's so many foods that are processed that have added sugars that we need to avoid. We don't have to run from watermelon. So I always tell patients, eat all the fruit you want. Don't worry about the sugars in fruit. They're natural and combined with fiber and water. You'll never overdo it. You can always have plenty. So I love that that's one of your snacks.
No, I agree. And they teach you in like 4th grade that you are what you eat, and it's actually true.
I know. It's like an old way of putting it, but it is accurate. So plant-based diet sounds like is your thing. When you snack, you just you know you're going to snack, so you just have healthy snacks around. You don't deprive yourself.
Nuts are a great snack. They're delicious, and they're like superfoods. You don't get hungry because they have protein in them, and they have the good fats. They're actually good for your heart.
Very
I think
good
nuts are like just a phenomenal snack.
Yeah, so actually there's a lot of evidence around that. People who have a little bit of nuts every day, they're high calories, so you can't have like 5 cups of them, but like a handful of nuts a day actually decreases the risk of certain diseases like cardiovascular disease and cancer, and is associated with longer life, so a healthier, longer life.
Right, and a friend of mine is an Alzheimer's specialist, and he says blueberries and there's certain fruits that not only are good for your heart, but they could actually help prevent dementia.
Yes.
And that's a really big deal.
Yeah, I think the WHO, the World Health Organization, just released guidelines talking about how a plant-based diet, especially including colorful fruits and vegetables, though they're rich in antioxidants, are associated with a lower risk of dementia. And that's an official recommendation, like worldwide now. And physical activity.
Right, physical activity.
Yeah, I think increased blood flow, just generally, is going to help to push out toxins and help bring in antioxidants to help heal damaged tissues. So it's you just plant-based diet, physical activity, stress reduction with walks with Benji the dog here. This is a chill dog. I love this dog.
He is so chill. He's so chill that when he's sitting with a whole pile of his stuffed animals, sometimes it's hard to tell which is which.
I would love to see a picture of that. I think we're going to have you send one to the show so
Absolutely,
that we can
happy
put it up
to, yeah. No, and I would say another really critical thing is this connection with people.
Yeah.
That is such an important thing. Because as you get addicted, there's so much more to recovery than not taking drugs. It's all about rearranging your life. And as you get addicted to drugs, you sort of supplant your relationships with other people with the drug, and you sort of tune everybody out. And they say the opposite of addiction is connection. It's not recovery, but it's connection.
Yeah.
And you realize how important it is to have a community. And our society is so fractured these days. And I think a really important part of being healthy is just making sure, and I'm thinking a lot about this now as my kids are going off to college.
Yeah.
And Benji's great, but he's certainly not a social community. Sorry, Benji. Look at those eyes. It's really important to have a community around you, because we evolved as hunter-gatherers, like in a community, and our modern society is so fragmented. And I see so many patients that are just like dying of loneliness.
Yeah. No, I know. So that's social connection, which can be in person. What do you think about social media?
Well, that's sort of like so that's social connection with an asterisk.
Yeah. And getting the word out as far as a means of educating the public about not only healthy lifestyle, but also about substance use disorders and how to treat them and everything like that. You're big on social media.
Yeah, well, I think it's important. I think that we don't want the world to fall apart. Then it won't matter. None of this other stuff will matter if the world's burnt to a cinder. So I think it's pretty important to resist that.
And your writing is part of that. And I think that you're looking to write another book.
Yes.
Yeah. About?
Well, I can't say yet. That just happened today, so I'm not allowed to say.
Okay, I won't ask. All right, well, thank you so much for being on the show. Really appreciate it. Again, this is Dr. Peter Grinspoon. He's a physician at MGH, instructor at Harvard Medical School, and author of Free Refills. It is a page turner. Can't put it down. So check it out. Thank you so much for being here with us today.
Thanks, Monique.